In the year 1400, the city of Prague was one of the most important cities in Central Europe. Its streets were crowded with merchants, craftsmen, travelers, and farmers who had come from the surrounding countryside. Markets filled the town squares. Wooden stalls displayed bread, meat, vegetables, and cloth, and the sound of people bargaining echoed through the narrow streets. Life in a medieval city was busy and often difficult. Most people worked long hours simply to survive. Bakers rose before sunrise to prepare bread for the market. Blacksmiths hammered iron tools beside small workshops. Farmers brought carts of grain, vegetables, and livestock through the city gates. But where many people gathered together, crime was never far away. Small thefts were common in medieval cities. Food could disappear quickly from market stalls. A loaf of bread, a piece of cheese, or a handful of coins could mean the difference between hunger and survival. For the poorest citizens, temptation was always close. In the crowded marketplace of Prague, a thief might believe he could disappear into the sea of people. One quick movement, one unnoticed moment, and the stolen food could be hidden beneath a cloak. But markets were watched carefully. Merchants guarded their goods with suspicion, and city guards regularly patrolled the streets. These guards were responsible for keeping order within the city walls. They wore chainmail armor and carried simple weapons, moving through the crowds and watching for signs of trouble. When a theft was discovered, the reaction could be immediate. A merchant might shout loudly, drawing attention from everyone nearby. Heads would turn, people would stop what they were doing. Within seconds, a small crowd could form, pointing toward the suspected thief. For someone caught stealing, escape was not always easy. The narrow streets of medieval Prague twisted between timber houses and stone buildings. Crowded markets and busy alleys made running difficult. Guards could quickly push through the crowd, grabbing the suspect before he had a chance to disappear. Once captured, the accused person would often be restrained with iron shackles or rope. There were no modern investigations, and very little time spent questioning witnesses. Justice in the medieval city moved quickly. The goal was not simply to discover the truth, but to restore order and prevent further trouble. A captured thief would be taken away from the market and escorted through the streets by the city guards. Curious townspeople often followed behind, whispering to one another about what had happened. Some watched with anger, others watched with curiosity. For many people in medieval Prague, public punishment was a familiar sight. The prisoner would usually be brought to a holding cell or prison inside the city. These prisons were small, dark spaces with thick stone walls and heavy wooden doors reinforced with iron. Inside, the air was cold and damp. Light came only from torches or small openings in the walls. Chains hung from iron hooks, and the sounds of footsteps echoed through the narrow corridors. Here, the accused would wait. Soon the prisoner would be brought before city officials or a magistrate, where the accusation would be heard and a decision made. But the most important part of medieval justice did not happen inside a courtroom. It happened outside. In the time of the entire city, the prisoner would be taken from the dark cell and brought into the open streets once again. Guards would escort him through the city, often walking slowly so that people could see what had happened. News traveled quickly in a medieval town, and by the time the prisoner reached the square, many citizens already knew why he had been arrested. The town square was more than a marketplace. It was the center of public life. Announcements were made there. Merchants traded goods, and on certain days justice was carried out in front of everyone. For those accused of smaller crimes, the punishment was often meant to humiliate rather than severely injure. One of the most common punishments was the pillory, a wooden frame placed in the center of the square. It held the prisoner's head and hands locked into place, forcing him to stand in full view of the crowd. Once locked inside the wooden frame, the prisoner could do very little except wait. People would gather around the square, watching silently or whispering to one another. Some might point and laugh. Others simply observed, curious about what had happened. Merchants passing through the market might stop for a moment before returning to their stalls. Children sometimes stood at the edge of the crowd, trying to understand what the punishment meant. Guards remained nearby, making sure the situation did not become too chaotic. The purpose of the pillory was not only punishment, it was a warning. By placing the offender in the middle of the square, the city authorities were sending a message to everyone who passed by. Theft, disorder, and crime would not be ignored inside the city walls. Hours could pass with the prisoner locked into the wooden frame. The position was uncomfortable, and the attention from the crowd could be overwhelming. Some prisoners tried to hide their faces. Others stared quietly at the ground. Meanwhile, the city continued to move around them. Carts rolled across the square. Merchants continued their trade. Conversations resumed. Life in medieval Prague did not stop, even while punishment was taking place. For many citizens, this was simply part of daily life. Public justice was common throughout medieval Europe, and Prague was no different. These punishments were designed to keep order in a crowded and growing city. When the time of punishment was finished, the prisoner would finally be released from the wooden frame. Guards would unlock the heavy latch, and the offender would be allowed to leave the square. But the experience rarely disappeared so easily. Everyone who had witnessed the punishment would remember it, and that memory was exactly the point. As the crowd slowly dispersed and the square returned to its normal rhythm, the lesson of the punishment remained fresh in the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. Medieval cities like Prague depended on order to function. Within the crowded streets and busy marketplaces, even small crimes could create conflict and unrest. For city authorities, justice was not only about punishing the offender, it was about reminding the entire population that the rules of the city had to be respected. Public punishment served that purpose. When people saw a thief locked into the pillory in the middle of the square, the message was clear. Crime would not stay hidden. The city itself would become the witness. Guards continued their patrols through the narrow streets, watching markets, gates, and alleys. Merchants returned to their work, arranging goods and calling out to customers. Travelers passed through the city gates, bringing new stories and news from distant towns. Life continued, just as it always had. For most citizens of Prague, moments like this were part of the reality of medieval urban life. The laws of the city were enforced quickly, often publicly, and sometimes harshly. But these displays of justice were also a way of maintaining stability in a growing and crowded city. Behind the stone walls of Prague, thousands of people lived, traded, worked, and struggled to survive each day. In such a place, order was essential, and so the memory of the punishment remained in the square long after the crowd had gone. Because in medieval Prague, justice was never meant to be private. It was meant to be seen by everyone.